Hi, everyone. I'm back. It's Megan Shamas. I am now in front of the virtual fire, and I'm very pleased to welcome Tom Sheffield to join me for this fireside chat. Tom's the Senior Director of Cybersecurity at Target. And so this chat is around leveraging passkeys for enterprise and workforce sign-ins. We do have very many questions. There's a lot of questions actually in our queue around this. Whether synced passkeys are appropriate for enterprise environments, how should enterprises be looking at passkeys? And this session is really aiming to clarify and perhaps dispel some myths associated with this topic. So Tom is really a great asset for us to have here. Tom not only led Target's enterprise implementation of FIDO even before synced passkeys were introduced or a thing, and also just is a really great contributor to the FIDO Alliance, our enterprise deployment working group, and just brings a lot of topics for us to consider as we try to drive adoption of passkeys on the enterprise side. So welcome, Tom.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Megan.
Do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the chat if you want to tell us anything else about your illustrious career.
Yeah, as Megan mentioned, I've been with Target now for about 8 years. Been part of the FIDO Alliance for just over a year now. Formally, I've been partnering with many of the members for quite a while, leading up to Target's joining the Alliance. But we've been a passkey user since about 2019, or sorry, a FIDO user specifically, using legacy terminology, a passkey user now in current terminology. And we'll talk about some of those processes and decisions and paths along the way today.
Great, thanks, Tom. So if we could, I think we'll kind of talk about what you've done at Target and then move on to some sort of broader topics for enterprises to consider. So if we could, can you tell us a little bit about the Target journey with FIDO and how you went about implementing FIDO for employee sign-ins, what pieces were important, what things should folks give extra attention to, from a technical communication perspective, or anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, we started our FIDO journey all the way back in 2018. And at the time, we were looking at FIDOs as a second factor credential. So specifically, what you basically label as hardware security keys. We had built a FIDO server and deployed that internally and began using FIDO at that time as a second factor. It was Apple's joining of the FIDO Alliance in 2020, if my memory is correct. That sort of opened the door where we saw the full ecosystem be capable of supporting FIDO. And that's where we really got excited about FIDO as a primary authentication mechanism. We're a mixed ecosystem within the enterprise. I've used it on both Apple and Microsoft platforms, and getting Apple's support in the Alliance was really a big step to make it more broadly acceptable. It really drove the impetus for us to move from second factor to primary factor. We actually deployed that in I guess it was April of 2021 or May, World Password Day 2021. We launched our FIDO implementation. And at that point, we were now supporting FIDO credentials as a primary authenticator. So we had been investing in biometric capable devices for multiple years leading up to 2021. And so we knew we had the desktop platforms capable of supporting biometrics, and therefore that provided a very easy mechanism for our users to log in. And we're now approaching year 3 of FIDO within the enterprise, and been loving it. It's been a great time saver for our users. Obviously, we really value the security benefits alongside of it. Something we've been really proud of and been an advocate for a long time now.
Wow, great. Thank you. I think I feel like Target was maybe one of the first or earlier adopters of WebAuthn for the workforce. So that, is tremendous. But can you talk a little bit about what it's actually like to bring an entire workforce over to FIDO? So I feel like a lot of the questions that we get specifically from the enterprise side is, where would I start? Where should I start? And how did Target look at that? And how should organizations look at that? Is it by employee type, system type, something else? How have you approached that?
Yeah, so I'll take a step backwards for a second first, and I'll get there. So as we're thinking about rolling out, so it's now leading up to World Password Day 2021. Obviously, there's a heavy technology investment, right? You need to integrate a FIDO server into your authentication ecosystem. So we had to deploy that and get that plumbed in to our environment. Customer communications and user communications, training for our help desk, training for our CSERT team and our SOC was very important. So they understood, what does an account takeover risk look like? How might a user using a FIDO credential versus a password, how might they be looked at differently in terms of their authentication experiences and the like? And so a lot of work leading into the launch itself. As we looked at our environment, we're very fortunate. We have a very robust SSO environment across our web application suite. And so almost every web application at Target is integrated into our SSO platform. And so for us, that made it very easy to integrate FIDO into the SSO platform. And then therefore every application behind SSO automatically got the benefit for it. So the moment we turned it on, it was available for hundreds of applications. Every new application that launches into SSO automatically gets FIDO as a capable authenticator for them. So for us, the rollout was driven by platform, SSO being the specific platform. We had users early on that were using applications, web applications that weren't integrated into SSO. And they began going to their product team saying, hey, why can't I use my biometric? Why can't I use my fingerprint on my face to log into this application? So that actually drove further adoption of our SSO environment, which was a great side benefit as well. So, great control, great security around SSO, and something we could have all of our eyes watching, and then put a really robust security mechanism around it through FIDO. And really take a big step forward in terms of protecting our users, but also giving them a great user experience. In your environment, if you have a big SSO environment or any SSO at all for that matter, that might be a place to start. Another place you could start is based on risk. Maybe you look at your application portfolio and decide, which applications do I care more about? Because of the nature of what they do, the access they provide, the data they store or manage or processes that they execute or otherwise. Maybe it's risk-driven. Maybe it's risk-driven via internal versus external access, right? Protect your outer front door before you protect your inner doors, perhaps. Obviously, we're talking about WebAuthn. When we talk about FIDO, we're primarily talking about WebAuthn and mobile applications. So you're probably going to focus on your web portfolio first. I suspect you could have a number of applications that aren't web-based. There are third-party platforms out there that you could integrate with, and they would help you potentially plumb those in. So if third-party partnerships and applications and software is of interest to you, maybe find one of those, and they'll be able to help you in your web space and your non-web space. But really, it just comes down to, where do you think you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck? Where do you think you'll be able to communicate to your users effectively? Those will all be some of the considerations that would help you decide where to focus first.
What was the comm strategy or the prep required to get the workforce ready for this? And what was the lead up like for that?
Yeah, so we didn't send out mass communications because we didn't want to we didn't want to have to explain it to user in an email, right? It was very difficult. The interpretation in email is always up to the individual user. So if we didn't say something exactly right, we knew we ran the risk of alienating them or confusing them, or creating questions that we then have to answer in various support channels. So our approach was sort of I'll say a quiet rollout, if you will. We were actually prompting users after an authentication in our single sign-on page to actually click here to try logging in. We called our program Fingerprint ID as a brand name internally. And so we had a bunch of marketing materials that were created that directed the users to go check out Fingerprint ID as part of the login experience. So we communicated to people in the login flow and then encouraged them to take the one extra step. Hey, do you want to get rid of your password and not have to log in again via password? Click here to try it out. And then we would take them down the registration flow through the platform authenticators that we use on our workstations. We had a lot of marketing material behind that. We set up, and we have a process quarterly we call Demo Day at Target, where all the tech teams to get together and showcase the work we've been working on for the quarter. And so we had Demo Day booths for a couple quarters in a row, where we would have the opportunity to meet users, meet our customers face to face, and actually take them through the experience. Great way to get feedback as well. So through those conversations, we found different use cases that we might not have considered. We quickly realized this was during the pandemic, and we quickly realized we had a number of our users that were now set up working in a remote world. And so based on their desktop configuration, we had users tell us, hey, my laptop's off to the side of my desk. It's not convenient to touch my sensor anymore. Hey, I work with my lid closed. My sensor's not even accessible at all. I can't tell them to change the way that they work. I can't tell them to change their desk setup. That's just not going to work. But we did provide them some alternatives. We identified a biometric hardware security key that we've identified works just as well as a platform authenticator on a workstation. So we provided some alternatives to help get those users going, but everything we were doing was basically sort of ground up communication within the organization.
Great, thank you. So, okay, we've sort of set the stage. Okay, so at Target, you've rolled this out, leveraging platform authenticator, some security keys, all FIDO2 stuff, and then we come out and we say, oh, now we're going to be supporting the syncing of FIDO credentials across devices and providers. So one, what was your reaction to that, just having done this project? And then two, what is the status of synced passkeys within Target?
Yeah, so our feelings about synced passkeys in general were very good. Being in this space for quite a while, and now being a member of the Alliance as a Target entity, quickly realized that a device-bound passkey model, which was what I call legacy FIDO, if you will, was always going to face challenges in terms of scaling to be a global solution, right? How do you explain to your mom or your dad, your grandparent, your aunt or uncle, or otherwise, to get not just one security key, but two, so you have a backup, right? And then to remember to pull out both security keys when you register for a new site to make sure that you register on both keys so that you have the backup that you might need later on should you lose one of them. So it was just a model that was always going to be a difficult one to scale when you're talking about, the FIDO Alliance mission to reduce our reliance on passwords. And so in that regard, sync passkeys are a great step forward to make it easier for users to move between devices, whether it's a replacement device or lost or new or otherwise. Just makes it a lot easier for the process to work naturally and natively as users progress through their digital life cycle. So in that regard, very, very excited about sync passkeys. From a security perspective, and as I think about them as an enterprise within the environment, it's a paradigm shift for us. And we had to stop and adjust and figure out, how do we want to adjust the paradigm? And what I'm describing is in the original model of passkeys, what are now within the passkey nomenclature called device-bound passkeys, right? That private key never leaves the device. So I am confident that the user that possesses that device has the key to which they registered initially. When you get into the idea of sync passkeys, now the opportunity is presented for the passkey to be synced up to a cloud provider sync fabric, and then from there down to other devices. And so we begin to not necessarily lose sight of where the private keys are or have been, but we can't be certain that the user possessing the key at that moment in time is actually holding the device to which they registered the key. So it changes the security paradigm a little bit and causes us to pause and think about how we handled it. And what we ultimately decided in our world, as we take a risk-based view of our applications and our systems that we're protecting, and we've identified that in certain circumstances, a sync passkey may be good enough to access that application. Again, maybe the considerations are internal versus external, for example. Maybe it's other factors, the risk factors we've identified in our risk engine. But nonetheless, there are certain circumstances where we believe a sync passkey is sufficient. And there may be other circumstances where we decide that a sync passkey alone may not be sufficient. We may ask for something else. That may be a legacy second factor authenticator. It could be a security key itself. It's a bit clunky if you think about the use of something else on top of a sync passkey, but it provides us the assurance to give us the higher level of confidence that it is the user that we believe is on the other end of the keyboard, and we've decided that's been our best approach so far.
Thanks. I was laughing a little bit because when you described explaining to your grandparents or someone of similar age, how to do security keys, I actually did that with my in-laws who are, in 70 plus, and that was enough to sell me on understanding why that's just really not a consumer-ish product, and it's definitely a prosumer, and it has a lot of benefits, but it's definitely not an everyday consumer kind of a thing, which gets us to why, again, what we were talking about, what David talked about earlier, what Andrew sort of drove home is this is to scale mostly in consumer environments, but also there is, to your point, there are employees that this is a good enough way to get into certain applications. And I think that you really sort of answered this, but I think just to drill down a little bit more, on to the topic of, some organizations they don't see sync passkeys as appropriate for any type of employee sign-ins, or there's a little bit of maybe a myth that if you do FIDO or passkeys, it's only synced or device bound. And then, it's not meeting the MFA requirements. If it's synced, it might not be meeting MFA requirements. And I know I just said a lot of things, but if you could respond to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I will tell you my personal opinion is that I believe that using a passkey synced or device bound or otherwise is a form of MFA, right? You're accessing it either via something which is typically a PIN or a biometric, right? And that's unlocking the key, right? Which is now something you have. Now, again, the question becomes the something you have may be on the hardware security key that you're holding in your physical possession, and it may be something that you have synced up to the cloud and then perhaps on one or more other devices. And so I of the opinion, my personal opinion and what I advocate for across the board is that use of a passkey is always going to be a form of MFA. The question, therefore, from my perspective, is whether or not that MFA is good enough for you. Is it good enough for your security posture and position and your risk tolerance? And again, we've chosen a risk-based approach and said, in these circumstances, it's going to be allowed. These other circumstances, maybe we're going to ask for something else to doubly confirm or raise that assurance level that we're confident that we know who's on the other side of the keyboard. The other thing that I'll offer, there's been a lot of conversation, and depending on where your organization is, there's been conversations that some people have had about using passkeys on managed devices. So on a managed device, for example, I will accept a passkey. That is completely valid, and one additional control and capability that gives you a higher level of assurance definitely will work. I will offer that in my business as a retailer with the vast majority of my staff in a non-HQ environment. They're out in our stores, they're in our distribution centers. We don't have full device management over every device they use. I don't want to, right? Cost prohibitive to do that. And frankly, unnecessary burden to have a cashier's mobile device managed by our platform, by our MDM, right? But they access target resources. Specifically, their pay and benefits, their HR information. We've got a time scheduling system that they can access on a personal device. I want to protect them in the same way that I protect my knowledge workers who are accessing target data on target systems via target devices. So I don't want my team members in the field to have to downgrade to a password and then get stepped up from there to some other legacy form of MFA, because we're putting them right back in the same position that FIDO is trying to address, FIDO is trying to combat. And so for me, we've chosen, again, that in those circumstances, we believe the applications that they're accessing are sufficient for a sync passkey. So we give them the great experience of a passkey and that higher bar of security, which to me is a win-win as I wear my target enterprise business hat.
That's great. So I'm gonna throw a question in that just came in that just came into the queue. Which is I think very similar to what you're talking about, because you just said about the lack of managed devices. So folks have their own devices. So the next question is, are you therefore allowing your employees to choose what cloud platform that they're storing their passkeys? And are there any challenges with that?
Yes. So as an RP in the FIDO ecosystem, when the user presents themselves their FIDO credential, that is coming from the cloud, the credential provider that they choose. So it may be a platform authenticator, right, on the big three platforms. It may be a credential provider like a password manager, being the passkey provider. We will accept any of them in our ecosystem. It does create some concerns or some considerations, I should say. You're now beholden to the security posture of that passkey provider, right? I'm pretty confident in what Apple has published publicly around, and Google for that matter as well, about how they handle protecting the iCloud account, how they handle protecting the Google Password Manager, multi-factor inherently within those as well. Like all the capabilities that they have give me a high level of confidence in those situations. As new passkey providers or credential providers enter the mix and become a passkey provider, we now have to make sure that we understand what their capabilities are around protecting that cloud sync fabric, as I called it before, to understand what's the account recovery mechanism, right? How are they protecting those keys, those passkeys that they're now storing? Because again, in some cases, that is a level of access, up to a certain risk tolerance for us, that a user with that key would have access to. So we want to make sure we understand what those are, and then understand as we go forward as an industry, how are they conforming? How are they staying compliant? What if they're breached, right? We've not yet seen a passkey provider be breached, but we're all wondering to ourselves what's going to happen. Should there be one, or if there is one later on, how are we gonna handle that? What are we gonna do about it? And so those are all considerations that we're now thinking about as the ecosystem continues to evolve beyond the first three to being a vast majority now of providers that we're seeing pop up, which is exactly how the standard was written. That's what the FIDO Alliance desired, right? That's what was been enabled, but it does expand your risk appetite or your risk environment a little bit, because now you've got more providers that you have to be concerned about.
Yeah, and I think that during the open Q&A AMA later, because I think we had a few questions actually come in about that, we will kind of talk about how the FIDO Alliance is looking at that and how like what we might be putting into place to help folks like you be able to determine what security those providers have in place, just to be able to provide that kind of assurance, right? Because that is a valid it's about totally valid consideration. It's a new consideration.
Yep.
Speaking of requirements, there are organizations, of course, out there that have to meet certain regulatory requirements. They might follow, for example, NIST guidelines, wanting to meet different, assurance levels for different types of employees. And some of these requirements, regulatory at least, have been put into place before passkeys even were contemplated. So how do you recommend those folks in those sort of regulated environments look at passkeys?
Yeah, so I know that NIST is working on, I think it's revision 4 currently of 863-B, that will recognize passkeys not by name, but by capability. And so if you understand the passkey specifications, you'll be able to understand where they're referring to a sync passkey, where they're referring to a device-bound passkey. But it's good to see NIST recognizing them. I'm not aware in the US of any specific regulatory requirement that says thou shalt not use passkeys. There's none. The closest that I've come up with is in the government space, FIPS 140-2, I think it is, or 3, I forget which one it is. There are some language there. I know some of the executive orders, the president's office require phishing-resistant authentication. So in those cases, if you're bound by those governmental requirements or regulations, you may be driven to use a FIDO-based authentication, which is actually helpfhel to the story. Obviously, from a SOX, a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective, there's zero language around how you authenticate. PCI defines MFA, but they don't define it as phishing resistant. They don't define exactly which MFA to use. My personal opinion is any organization that uses any form of legacy MFA today, including SMS, OTP, although it's been deprecated and advised by NIST not to use, if you still use it to protect anything today, passkey is significantly better and should be an immediate replacement for SMS or email-based OTP for that matter.
Right. And I think Andrew touched on the fact that in the regulatory environment, there's a reframing that needs to be done where, it's that the notion of MFA has been it's really not really needed anymore when you have fixed the first factor. And so I think just having, we look at phishing resistance instead of saying, how many factors do I have? It's more, is it phishing resistant? And there is some education and reframing that we're working on within the FIDO Alliance to help address that with the regulators, because it's just something that we've thought one way for so long, and now we have a whole different we have to change our whole mindset of how we look at MFA, right? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think one of the goals for the Enterprise Deployment Working Group, which I'm a member of within the Alliance, one of our goals this year is to help get better language out there alongside the regulators from and or alongside the regulators around what does MFA look like? What does phishing resistant access look like? At the end of the day, what we're all trying to combat is account takeovers, right? We want to make sure that the user on the other end of the keyboard is exactly who we expect it to be. And so if you can get into a phishing resistant model, doesn't matter how many factors you have anymore, right? The goal is you've eliminated or minimized the risk of somebody being able to take over that account and impersonate that user. And so for us, it's really focused on how do we partner with those entities. I talk internally about our job now within Target and within the FIDO Alliance is really to become an advocate. That's why I'm here today. But it's also become an educator, right? We need to work with our QSA assessors, for example, in the PCI world, and help them understand that when they talk about MFA, yes, there is language inside of PCI that sort of defines MFA and what's good MFA and what's not allowed and things like that. But we need to get beyond that and help them recognize why phishing resistant is actually the key thing. I know we're not going to get the PCI Council to change their language overnight. There is a process that they're going to go through to convert language from MFA to phishing resistant, whatever they want to call it. But in the interim, how can we keep getting the message out there? How can we keep getting the assessors and the auditors to understand through a customized approach? PCI DSS 4.0 allows for the concept of a customized approach. I don't necessarily believe it requires a customized approach, but if that's what your assessor or your auditors require, you can define a customized approach where you've articulated how you use FIDO, how you use Passkeys, and then you can start using them in your environment. The one environment that I don't have a lot of experience with is the banking or financial services environment. Again, I'm not aware of any regulatory requirements within that space. Again, I think it comes more along the lines of what do the auditors say? What do the examiners say? And again, our job is to educate them on why MFA alone probably isn't the right language to use. It really should come down to phishing resistant authentication, period.
Right. That puts it perfectly. Thank you. That was great. So as we wrap up, is there 1, 2, or 3 things, as we look at passkeys for enterprise, what would you say would be the major takeaways that you would want our audience to take away today?
Start number 1, right? They are here. They are real. The ecosystem, the environment is right for them, right? Billions of devices that are capable of leveraging FIDO. And so that bar, if you will, has been removed. Continue to educate, right? If you want to remove the regulatory bar, continue to educate and partner with your regulatory partners to help them understand. And again, if nothing else, if you use OTP today of any form, FIDO is going to give you significantly better user experience with a significantly better security experience. And there's not many security programs that I've been part of in my 25-year career in this space that offer you security and user experience simultaneously. And so if you're using anything other than FIDO, you've got a great opportunity to up your game and provide a great experience for your users, which should make you a hero.
Oh, thank you so much. And the passkey superhero, that's what the shield's for. We're arming everyone with that defense. So you can be your own authentication superhero. You just walked me right into that, so I had to do that.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Tom, for your time today, and also your just awesome work and helping to educate and drive passkey adoption forward. It's great to have you as part of our team.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite today.